Welcome to My Life, Tanya Applied, with Rabbi Simon Jacobson, a journey into the deepest teachings of Torah and their application to our personal, emotional, and psychological lives.
A good moed and a freilichen kvittel. We continue our journey in the life-changing Sefer Tanya. This program is made possible by Rena Lights LLC and is in honor and memory of Rabbi Yosef Halevi Weinberg Olav Hashalom, Rabbi Moshe Pinchas HaKohen Katz Olav Hashalom, Rabbi Yael HaKohen Khan Olav Hashalom, and it is in schus and merit of Rabbi Zev Yecheskel HaKohen and Risha Katz Le'edich Yomim V'Shanim Tevis for many long, healthy years. So we continue in chapter 9, Perek Tes. The Alter Rebbe is laying out the coordinates of the two forces, the two drives, called the Nefesh HaLekis and the Nefesh HaBamis. The divine soul and the animal soul. The divine soul that resides in the mind, the reflective mind, Chochmah Bina Das, and from there it travels to the emotions, to the right side of the heart, generating, giving birth to divine emotions of love, of reverence. Specifically, he spoke about love and tiferes, a form of gazing at the beauty of God and His majesty. And the left side of the heart is the other force called the animal soul, that's driven by the impulsive emotions. And these are two forces that are confronting each other. And we learned L'um L'um Yamatz, which is referring to one nation shall overpower the other nation. Talking about two nations, Yaakov and Esav. And what are they battling over? You, me. Irktana Zehaguf. Like two kings who both want to conquer and rule and govern over the same city. Like we learned in the Pasuk in Kehelis, it says, Irktana vanoshim b'ma'at. Irktana, this is the body of a person. Its population, its citizens, are the limbs of the body, all the functions and all the instruments of the body. And then there are two kings that are fighting over it. The Yetzer Tov and the Yetzer Hara. Who will control? So now we have a visualization that you can describe your very perpetual battles that go on in your life. Every one of us has conflicts all the time. Your mind tells you one thing, your heart tells you another. Yetzer Hara, your evil inclination, is interested in its own temptations, its own desires, its own indulgences. The divine part of you wants you to serve God and do things right. Are you going to be selfish or are you going to be selfless? Every moment of the day, we encounter these two choices. Sometimes it's subtle, sometimes it's very overt. So it's the two kings battling over you. So just visualizing that is already I would say even freeing in a way. When people say, I feel conflicted, I'm not sure I should do this, should I do that? Now you know what these two voices are coming from. It was the way we were created. By bringing the Pasuk L'um L'um Yemez, the Alter Rebbe is telling us this is Yaakov and Esav. It's the way God created Yaakov and Esav. This wasn't by choice that a person chose one or the other. Rivka was carrying a set of twins, equal in all ways, like we learned earlier, the Nefesh HaLekis and Nefesh HaBamis, Zeluma Ze'asalikim. Two parallel worlds, alter egos, both have 10 faculties, both have 3 garments, and they're both battling, and they have equal resources. And that's the story of life. So beyond the actual explanation, there's a certain, I hesitate to use the word poetry and eloquence because we are dealing with a difficult battle that can lead to all kinds of consequences and sometimes not positive ones. But there is something, when you hear it that way, it just puts into context and perspective the battles of our lives. So to personalize this, just look at yourself and look at whatever conflict you may have. It could be a conflict within yourself, which is obvious, the most obvious, but it could be a conflict with another. What's right and what is wrong? So we're going to learn here, not just how the battle works, but also how to win the battle, how to resolve the situation. This is not meant to become a stalemate of a perpetual battle that just remains in limbo. It's meant to be resolved. But it's the story of life in this world. So now that we understand the two forces at work, these two kings wanting to control the city, the Alter Rebbe is going to use this example and take it all the way to the logical conclusion of every detail. So before we continue on, let's just think about it. When two nations or two kings, like he puts it here, are battling over a territory, land, and the people that live there, and the resources that they have. So how does this battle work? We know in every war, in every battle, and we're talking about two forces that are compatible with each other, or else there's no battle. So one, like he says, one shall overpower the other. K'shazeh comes and nefel, as Rashi brings there from Chazal. When one rises, the other will fall. When one falls, when the other one rises, this one will fall. Which is exactly what happened to the Jewish people, the Jews and the Edom, Malchus Edom and Malchus Yisrael, the children of Yaakov and the children of Esav, would ultimately come and confront each other. And when Edom, the Romans, destroyed the temple, so they dominated. When the temple rose and the temple stood, the children of Yaakov dominated. L'osad lovi, when Mashiach comes, the battle will be over. V'oisel Hashem amlucha, like Rashi brings in Parsha Vayishlach, that ultimately Yaakov will dominate. But not just dominate, there will be peace ultimately. But meanwhile, there's a battle. But when a battle is fought, and you look at it closely, even when one side is winning, it doesn't just win and it's all over, because it's dealing with an enemy. So if one country conquers another, even if the conquest is complete, they have to deal with a population that may not accept them. Or at least part of the population. Even if they accept them, accept the victor, it could be very reluctantly. And it could also be there pockets of resistance, as we see. Even after a battle is won, there's always insurgents. There are those that don't accept, rebels. So you see, a battle is an incremental process. And the Alter Rebbe is going to use this mashal, this example, based on the Irk Tana Zeh from the Gemara in Nedarim, to show us that the same thing applies in the battle in our own lives, between the divine and the animal souls. So we'll go through step by step as he spells it out. And then he's going to spell out in the nimshal, in the moral, what that is in our own lives. But one of the classic things you see from the Alter Rebbe, in general, the mepsari echzel lekah, from my flesh I behold God. From our very lives, you can experience godliness. So it's not just going to a mountain or experiencing a revelation or having a spiritual epiphany. Your very life, your very flesh, and in this case, your very battle, your very body, and the voices and the drives and the different forces at work that are telling you, follow this way or follow that way, whether it's your impulses or it's the reflective mind, etc., as we discussed, are all very, very palpable and tangible when you understand the example. So let's now learn the example in detail, as the Alter Rebbe spells it out. And it's going to be literally step by step by step. So what does the Alter Rebbe say? So let's review what we learned last week, just read the few lines. He says, Achine ksiv Elohim yemotz. However, the verse states that even though we do have the two forces at work, but it's one nation shall overpower the other nation. Each soul wants to dominate. Ki aguf nikri ktana, for the body is called a small city. U'komoishe shnei malachim nilchamim al ir achas, and like we find, just as two kings battle over one city, not two cities, they want control of the same city. To what? Shekol echad reitza L'kofsho limlech aleha. Each king desires to conquer it and rule over it. Later we'll learn Zev Zeh Shelton. That we talk about the Nefesh L'kis, Nefesh Abam, is that they're both Shelit. Shelit are like dominate. So they both want desire to conquer and rule over it. See here the words conquer and rule. Not just conquer, but they want to rule over it. You can conquer something and then destroy it or completely annihilate it or whatever it may be. You want to conquer and rule it, govern over it. And now he explains what that means in the Moshel. Be specific. What does the king actually want? Tahainu. This means that each king wants lahanig yeshver kiritzene. It's the first thing. To conduct its inhabitants, to govern its inhabitants according to his will. So when he didn't conquer the city and its inhabitants, remember the inhabitants is what he called anoshim ba'ma'at, the limbs of the body, as we'll talk soon in the moral. But here we're still talking the example, the inhabitants. So before he controlled the city and governed and ruled it, the inhabitants didn't go according to his will. His will may be that he wants them to follow his philosophy, his policies, to pay taxes, to support his government, his rule. I mean, whatever his will may be. So it's not just conquering. He wants the inhabitants to follow and to go by according to his will. Lahani yeshver kiritzene. The next point, not just that. Usheyu sorim l'mashmate b'chol asher yigzer aleim. You could have them conducting that the inhabitants, the citizens of the city, are following his will, but there's something more, so that they obey his every whim. Sorim l'mashmate, they follow mashmate his authority in everything that he decrees on them. Because you could have the first half, that they conduct themselves according to his will, but doesn't mean they follow every order. Maybe some orders they ignore. So you see, the Alter Rebbe is not leaving anything taken for granted. He's not leaving any stone unturned. The control has to be such, that's what the king wants, that they follow all the decrees that he decrees upon them. So that's the general desire that each king has in wanting to control the city. Now, what is this in the Nimshal? Continues the Alter Rebbe. Kach, shtei nefoshes. So too the two souls. And what are the two souls? He spells out Elakis, the divine soul. V'hachiyunis habahamis, and the energizing animal soul. Shema klipa, that comes from klipa. So Alter Rebbe, even though he's explained earlier these details, but he wants to make it clear he's talking about exactly these two forces. The divine soul driven toward what God wants. Bittul, Kedusha, as we learned earlier in chapter 6. But even before that, when he spoke about 2, 3, 4, and 5, about the divine soul. Then there's the Chiyunis Abamis. Interesting expression. Sometimes he calls it Nefesh Abamis. That's when the focus is on the behemoth within it. The indulgence of behemoth. Say, you're behaving like a behemoth. Indulging in something completely for your own needs. Chayunis, sometimes Chassidus uses the expression Nefesh HaChayunis, more like the biological life. It's not Elikis, which is driven by transcendence and divine and reaching and connecting to the divine, to something greater than ourselves, but it's not quite as much as Bahamas. Sometimes the expression Nefesh HaTivis, the natural soul. Sometimes you speak about Nefesh HaTivis and you say that, and it gravitates toward Gashmias or Chumrias, toward the physical. Chumrias is toward the crass, even more indulgence. So there's many different expressions. Here he's using the word Achiyunis Abamis, which tells us that he's not just talking about purely the behemoth indulgence, but Chiyunis also, even for survival purposes, even if you're not indulging just in a desire, but it's for your survival, like we learned earlier in chapters 5 and 6, especially in chapter 6. But regardless, it's coming from Klippa. Klippa is what? The shell. It's not the fruit within. It's not the purpose within existence, within the food, within the drink, within all the material activities we're involved in this world. It's a focus on the klipa, on the means, on the shell. So he says, so just as we just said, like let's go back to the Lashon. Just as two kings that are battling over control of the city, that its inhabitants to govern its inhabitants according to the will of the king, and that they should all listen to every one of his decrees. So too with these two souls, the divine soul and the animal soul from the klipa, nilchame zu im zu, nilchame zoi im zoi, ala guf v'chol evarov. These two souls fight each other, battle each other over the body and all its limbs, which is the city and the Anosh Ma'at and all its limbs and all its parts. And here too, what do these two kings want? What does the divine soul want? And what does the animal soul want? Exactly what the two kings want when they control a city. So he continues. Shalakis chefts over it saying, the divine soul's desire and will, chefts means desire and will. Like we talked before, the king's will is what? For exclusive rule over the person and his conduct. So that he itself, shetehi levado, the divine soul alone, without any partner, meaning not without the partnership of the other king. The animal soul should be the ruler over the person and manigose, and control and govern it. So he says here both things. That Meishal Allah manigose, like he said before in the Moshel, the Kafsha ulim lechaleho. Lahanig yeshver kirisene. So not just to conquer it and own it, but also that it should govern it. The divine soul wants to govern this city, like the king who wants to govern the people in the city that he's fighting over. Same language like in the Moshel. And all the Evarim. So he wants to control and govern the city. And all the Evarim, which are compared to the population, to the citizens, says three things here. That all their limbs of the body should obey and follow what the king wants, what the divine soul wants. Furthermore, not just follow the mashmata, his governance, his authority, but b'telim etzloi, they should be nullified and surrender themselves completely to him. Like we said before, she'yisarel mashmaite b'chol asher yigzer aleim. So here he's going even further. Not just that they do what he wants, and not just they follow every order of his, but also they're b'telim etzla. In the Moshel he didn't say that word, that they're nullified before him. Here he adds it. But Pashtus, the reason is because in the Moshel he doesn't have to spell out every detail. When it comes to the divine soul wants that the entire body, the entire city and its inhabitants, its limbs, should be subjugated, should be sublimated, and to be simply instruments of the king of the divine soul. And then he goes further, completely, because you could have batla and it's not complete. And furthermore, they become a merkava, which means an exclusive vehicle. So you can be, someone can be saram l'mashmaita, you can saram l'mashmaita listen to his orders. You could also be even furthermore completely nullified and completely, I would say subjugated is the right word, completely dedicated. But a merkava is at further. Merkava means that you're actually an extension of a channel of the king's will. So think about it. A king is fighting over a city. Just to drive the point home, the city has people, the citizens that don't want this king. Because before he controlled it, they were controlled by the other king. Or whatever. But even if they're not against the king, but who says they want to follow whatever he says? But the divine soul This is not about dominance. Divine soul is driven by the purpose of existence. That the whole reason you were created. Ani nivresi l'shamash eskeni. Or even furthermore, ani le nivresi elo l'shamash eskeni. Which can be helped to explain the different levels here. That your entire existence is to serve the divine, to serve God. Or ani loi, which is liikuva, that you were not created but nothing else but to serve the divine. Everything God created was in order to glorify, to honor God. But the human being has their own agenda, especially with the animal soul. As we're going to learn, the animal soul has a very different agenda: self-preservation, self-interest, the egocentric consciousness that we have. So we don't just want to accept easily the divine soul's rule and governance. So that's why, as I explained earlier, it's stages. And what are the stages? That the first thing is that he wants to meshalos alov manigose, wants to rule over it. Meaning, who's the boss in your life? Is it your divine animal soul and your own needs and your own interest? Or is the boss the one who created you, your mission in life? Your soul, your divine soul. Who's boss? Umanigose, and who governs you? That's furthermore, you could have a boss and they're not necessarily governs you. You may not be doing other things, but it could be he's dominating, forcing upon you. But he wants to govern. Actually, you could also teach Hameshelas Alov Umanigose. Well, governing your conduct. That he governs how you behave. So it's not just controlling, but also governing your behavior, like in the Moshel, like he said, not just to conquer, but also to rule over him. But then goes further. The divine soul doesn't just want to conquer and rule over our conduct, but that all the parts of the person, all our limbs and all our organs and everything all our functions, Yisarim l'mashmaita, should be obedient, subservient, l'mashmaita to his authority, or her authority, if you say nefesh alikis. Okay, so that's a further. That's more than just governing. Furthermore, ubtelim etzel legamri. So when you think about a city that initially was not controlled by this leader, this doesn't happen overnight. This takes time. They can be conquered, but they refuse to be governed. And that needs to be implemented. We're not talking now about how it's implemented. This is not about forcing. We're not talking about the laws of the land. We're talking about the goals of actually conquering. Conquering is not just controlling the land, controlling who goes in and who goes out. It's also conquering the hearts and minds of the people. So that takes stages. Yisrael Mashmaita means that they follow his authority. Telem Etzel Legamri is a far deeper connection, that they're ready to be completely subservient to him, to the king. And we're talking about a benevolent king. We're talking about the divine soul here. So that's even furthermore. That needs even more education and more training, that the body should be bottled. And finally, Umerkove Elal. And Merkava means the ultimate. We talk about Ovis, Heinen, and Merkava, that 24/7, all they were was a channel, a vehicle for the divine. That's even more than bottle. Bottle can be subservient, but it doesn't mean that everything you do is 100% simply a vehicle of the divine. Umerkove Elal. V'yiyu levush le'eser b'chinesel v'gimel levushel kan iskarim. And what this means, becoming a merkava, that it becomes like a vehicle of expression, like a garment. What is a garment? When you put on a garment, the garment fits the person. We're talking about a tailored garment that fits the person. It's not the person himself, it's not the limbs, but it's the thought, speech, and action, like we learned. So this limbs, the iktana ze'aguf, this small city called the body and the inhabitants of the body, the limbs, have now become a garment to what? Not to the animal soul, but to the 10 powers or the 10 faculties of the divine soul that we learned in chapter 3. And the 3 garments of the divine soul that we learned in chapters 4 and 5. Thought, speech, and action. Like he says, Haniskorim. He's referring to chapters 3 and 4, 5, respectively. That the faculties, Chabad, Chagas, Nihim, the intellectual, cognitive, and emotional faculties are now all a garment. Or I should say that the person is a garment to the 10 faculties of the divine soul. So the mind and the emotions are all being driven toward divine purpose. And the 3 expressions of that soul, which is thought, speech, and action, are also a merkava. So you can say, Machshava, Dibra, and Maisa, let's talk about it in an example, the thought, speech, and action. And the very functionalities and the faculties of the citizens of a city. So when the king first conquers them, it doesn't mean they completely follow what he wants. That's his goal, is to ultimately, first of all, to conquer, to govern, then that they should listen to him. They should be completely sublimated and completely subservient to him, and ultimately become a merkava. All these stages. So the same thing is the human body, and its faculties, and its garments, also go through these stages until the point of being a merkava to what? To the divine soul and its 10 faculties and its 3 garments. So there, the irktana, the body and all its parts, are what? Are following the divine soul's instructions. So the king is now fully in control of the city, of irktana zehaguf. And then he continues, sheyislapshu kulim be'evri haguf, v'yi haguf kulei mole mehem levadam. That these divine faculties and garments, divine, should manifest and dress up and influence all the parts of the body, be'evri haguf, v'yi haguf kulei, and the entire body be mole mehem levadam. The entire body, meaning the entire city, without any resistance, without any enemies, everyone is now aligned and a vehicle and a channel for the king's desire. In this case, the divine soul is in complete control of the city. Now again, this comes in stages, as he explained here. But the ultimate is now you know you've conquered the city. You haven't just conquered it. You've transformed all its inhabitants to be subjects, to follow the desire of the king, in this case of the divine soul. So you see how every word is precise here in detail. Now the Alter Rebbe is now going to continue further with the example. He's going to actually say that there's no insurgents. But that will leave for the next year, simply to limit of time, and we'll stop here. And the lesson is very clear. We're talking about you and I, talking about our city, the city that you are and all its parts, and a very clear visual picture of what the goal is of the divine soul. So with that, everyone have again a good moed, and a good kfittel, a good yontif, freilich and simchas Torah, and may we march this year to the Gula Amitis Vashlema. Good tevach, good moed.
This has been My Life, Tanya Applied with Rabbi Simon Jacobson. Please join us again next week. Visit chasidusapplied.com for archived classes and more resources.